Hello, everybody. This sounds unthinkable until you realize it's already been discussed for the third time. Greenland's become a strategic obsession, and the language around it's growing dangerous, especially from U.S. leadership. Military access to resource control. This isn't about defense, it's about dominance. Let's look at how empires repeat the same mistakes and why this moment should concern everybody. We'll follow this up with many discussions on the various topics here. Stay tuned, as they say. Why Greenland? Okay. The far right wants to flood the zone to keep the left from being reactive. This is one of the key things that, want to hide, what the real intent of what they're doing. So that's why the U.S. would not focus on this as much, along with anything else that's going on out there. We have the Epstein case, the Fed chair being threatened, ICE in Minnesota, doing their assaults. We just had another person shot in the leg already. The economy is failing and so much more. They just want to flood us with all the stuff going on that we cannot focus on any one thing. So mainstream media isn't doing it. The individuals that kind of raise their voices up are here doing it. Okay, applying for the Golden Dome. What is that? I'll explain a little bit more later into this. And then this follows up to, this all plays into the National Defense Strategy that was published for 2026. The Monroe Doctrine, we'll talk about this later, which has traditionally been called the Monroe Doctrine. Okay, look, 3 times the U.S. tried to buy Greenland. 1867, the Seward Proposal. This was proposed by the former Secretary of State, William H. Seward, that bought Alaska, which they really pretty much called this Seward's folly, buying Alaska. But we know now that's not the case. The idea of part dealing for Denmark for Arctic access and resources. There have been a couple of centuries talk about finding the Northwest Passage. This never formally pursued at this point beyond just the exploration, expansion era thinking of the late 18th century. And we'll go on to the first time that it was really, second time offer that was really thought about and considered by the president at that time. In 1946, President Truman did a cash offer, not just cash, but gold. Real gold, $100 million to Denmark. They should have taken it. The U.S. probably doesn't have $100 million worth of gold at Fort Knox, that's another story for another day. The motivation for this time was Cold War security, Arctic air routes, and the Soviet threat. Denmark firmly rejected this offer. This is the real offer that was done. And then we look at 2019, Trump's public interest into this. Donald Trump raised it, not a formal written offer, but serious enough to spark diplomatic talks. Trump, again, at that point, like he did now, triggered a public rejection from Denmark, and Denmark's response, it's not for sale. And there's multiple videos since then talking about this in reference to, Greenland's never going to accept it. Now it's a modern geopolitical flashpoint. One of the things that President Trump is needing this to tie in the Golden Dome. What is that? Okay, the Golden Dome, which is the U.S. air defense system, really is. And when you hear this phrase, the American Golden Dome, it sounds like the U.S. has an invisible shield protecting the entire country. The idea is comforting. It's almost a myth. It's like a unicorn out there. The so-called Golden Dome is not an official U.S. air defense system. It is a political and media phrase used to describe the idea of a nationwide missile shield, similar to Israel's Iron Dome, but a much larger scale. In reality, the U.S. does not only have one single dome protecting the country. There never was. A little bit of history. I've been in the military 27 years. And worked with the air defense community and have a lot of insight into this. During the 60s and 70s, the U.S. had various missile systems like Nike Zeus, Nike Ajax, and Nike Hercules with locations all around the U.S. This was kind of like that Iron Dome or Golden Dome, they're calling it now. But that was a very expensive proposition, but only protected a few little areas. It's just not going to work to stop ICBMs that have MIRV warheads that split off into multiple directions from one missile. It's just not going to provide a solid coverage from coast to coast. We'll all be toast. It doesn't stop nuclear missiles, intercept rockets, or even cruise missiles, like the MIRVs have talked about. You can't just defend every city, every state all at once. In other words, an impenetrable shield that this Golden Dome would be. The system doesn't exist. So what the U.S. actually has, and they're trying to put this together, instead the U.S. relies on a layered missile defense made up of different systems designed for specific threats, not a total protection. Systems meant to insert small numbers of long-range missiles, nuclear or otherwise, mainly from Korea, like countries like North Korea, based in Alaska and Hawaii. And it's limited by design. Secondly, there's Aegis missile defense deployed on Navy ships. And their accuracy has been really good. Give you an example, in 2008, I believe it was, when I was still in the air defense community, the Navy Aegis shot down a dying satellite, and that was pretty historic in that sense of what it can do. These ships intercept missiles in space or the atmosphere, but only where they're deployed. So they've got to be where they expect the threat to be at. And then third, a system like THAAD or Patriot. I've worked with both those. And these depend on their radar systems. Patriot's a local radar system. This is not classified up to 80 miles away approximately, but it's very narrow in scope and the width of coverage, so they're directional. You'd have to have at least 4 to 6 other Patriot radars of that battery just to do a 360 coverage. So they only do point-targeted threat defense. THAAD, which is Theater Area Army Air Defense, which can do intercontinental missile radar coverage. And then again, it's only just within that direction of it's looking at up to a certain layer of defense in the atmosphere. But they're not all meant to defend the entire U.S. homeland. So there's a lot more that is really dependent on this. Then look at, okay, why is there no real dome? Okay, a true nationwide missile defense shield would require what? Thousands of interceptors, constant upgrades, and then look at this, trillions of dollars, not millions or billions, but trillions of dollars. This is what killed the Soviet Empire with the threat of what Reagan had with the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI. It didn't really exist, but it scared the Russians to death, and it would have cost trillions of dollars if it was ever to become real, and it never would be real today because of that. And now we're doing the same thing, trillions of dollars. Our American middle class would be sucking that up for decades to come. And even then, it wouldn't be perfect. Worse, building a full dome would encourage adversaries to build more nuclear weapons. We'd have an arms race that you have never seen the likes of before. This is why missile defense is intentionally limited. Okay, the real strategy has got to be deterrence. U.S. defense isn't based on stopping every missile. It's based on making sure no one dares to launch one. Now, that strategy is called deterrence, of course, and this is why it's an idea of a Golden Dome to be more political theater than military reality. And then finishing up about this topic of the Golden Dome, when you hear about America's Golden Dome, you'll understand this. It's not a shield. It's not a guarantee, and believing in it too much can be dangerous, because history showed us that when empires believe they're untouchable, that's when their overreach begins. Okay, since covering that, we'll go into talking about the Monroe Doctrine to Greenland and how, again, empires overreach. Empires don't announce their decline, they just justify it, one security interest at a time. Right now, this is Greenland, there's Panama, Venezuela. Again, sadly, the U.S. is in stage 5 of decline of empires, and that's, again, explained in other videos. Okay, in 1823, the United States introduced the Monroe Doctrine, warning European powers to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. It was framed as defensive. But over time, it became something entirely a blueprint for dominance. Today, the same logic is reappearing in places you might not expect, including Greenland, which is our topic. You have Panama and other countries that are affected of this doctrine. Okay, what the Monroe Doctrine really was, had a simple message. Europe, stay out of America. The U.S. won't interfere in Europe. On paper, this opposed to colonialism. In practice, this solely turned the U.S. into an arbitrator of the hemisphere. By the U.S. 20th century, it was used to justify military inventions. This is where we had the banana wars of the 1920s and 30s. U.S. Marines were sent to various countries to protect U.S. colonial interests of the banana countries, companies, and large U.S. corporations like Dole Pineapple. Regime changes, economic control, and then what began as protection involved in total control of the hemisphere. Now, modern versions of the same doctrine, which you'll hear now, is the Monroe Doctrine, called Monroe Doctrine for Donald Trump. Monroe Doctrine never disappeared, it's just evolved. Today, its logic showing up in NATO expansion. That's what's got Russia scared to death and wants to combat it. It's been fighting any peace plans in Ukraine because of it. Global U.S. basing all over that's pushed that. Rules-based order enforcement. This area is often called Pax Americana, a world shaped by U.S. power, trade dominance, and military reach. Like Rome or Britain before it, the empire promised stability, but demand compliance. This is not going to happen. I mean, this takes away everything we talk about in politics about making America great again. This is not making America great. It's making us look horribly bad. Okay, why Greenland fits this pattern? Greenland isn't just ice and snow. It sits in the center of 1, Arctic shipping routes, 2, rare earth minerals, and then 3, it's got U.S. military radar systems. We used to have what was called the DEW line of radars that was there to detect missile systems incoming from the Soviet Union at the time, and that's long gone. When powerful nations start talking about owning, controlling, and militarizing territories for security, and that's what Trump's doing for security, history tells us what comes next. This isn't about Greenland alone, as I've stated before. It's about empires expanding and believing that geography equals entitlement. Whew, that's a mouthful. Okay, why is this overreach? Okay, empires fall when? They confuse influence with ownership, security with entitlement, power with permanence. Greenland, like Latin America before it, became a test case. Now, how far can power stretch before it snaps? It may be found sooner than later. History answers is always the same. Okay, Monroe Doctrine began as a warning to empires. Over time, it turned America into one. When empires start believing they can redraw maps without consequences, that's not strength, that's overreach. Okay, now I look at some other options we do. Instead of threatening Greenland, we can push to establish a NATO land base so that we have NATO air squadrons there on rotations, maybe even 2 of them. So that way, if one has been threatened by missiles, we got a backup base. Do the same for NATO naval base, so that way everybody shares in the cost of the pie of protecting Greenland. But no one's been talking about this. This is, again, just my offered opinion to what can be done. And then, if the U.S. offers to do that, they open up several of their own bases besides just NATO bases. And then, the U.S., I would recommend cleaning up the huge stockpiles of waste and junk that they left behind from all the other bases they had during the Cold War. So there's some good things can come out of this. Now, in closing, this does not have to come to the point where we lose our NATO allies and not have any friends in the world anymore, and isolating America from everybody. This is not the way to greatness and making America great again. So, again, please help me, push, the right direction that every member of Congress should be voting in these type of events. To if there's anything on the plate that Congress can do, please let's get them involved. Let's get them doing the right thing, because I am here for the American middle class that has to pay for it. The taxpayer dollars are not there to keep trillions of dollars into our national defense, trillions of dollars again on top of that for the Iron Dome. These are things that we need to save our economy instead. Save the American middle class before we lose it. Because the fall of all empires is when their middle class goes, and the country goes. Thank you, and have a great day.